Hey there guys, it's Josh here. Just before we get into today's video, I've got a quick announcement. So as you guys all know, I am a commissioned painter, but I've now finally got myself a website. So I'll have a link down to it below where you can see the gallery of all my previous stuff. Get in touch with me on there if you've got stuff that you're interested in getting painted and you want to quote and learn a bit more about how I work and what I've done, then that will all be there. So if that's something you're interested in, drop me a link in the comments below or check me out on the website and we can have a talk about that and you can learn a bit more about how that works. Anyway, on with the video. Hello everyone, welcome to Challenge 99, video number 6. Yeah, so 6 videos in now, this is going quite well. The company's progressing and we will keep up with that as we go. But I thought what would be quite nice to do today is to kind of go back to what some of my other videos are like and do a bit of a bonus video about the Howling Griffons, because we've done the colour schemes, we've been building the company, you've seen every step so far, but we don't know that much about the background of this chapter at all. So what today's video is going to be is me just going through who are the Howling Griffons, where do they come from, what are their style of fighting, and a few more bits of information about them. And you know, we may as well paint someone from the company while we're doing this. So today we are going to be doing this lieutenant. This guy right here. You remember him from the Build It video. So he'll be the person we'll be building as we talk about the Howling Griffons. So without further ado, let's crack on. If one was to identify the most distinguished chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, there are several names that would spring to mind. After we get past the first foundings of the Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Iron Hands and Ultramarines, that role of honour would probably then extend to the Black Templars, the Crimson Fists, the Red Scorpions and the Flesh Tearers, just to name a few. However, the Howling Griffons are easily a contender for the top spot and stand proudly amongst many of these others. For us as players, they may not have a codex supplement or any unique characters, but their story is as extraordinary as any other chapter out there. They are a distinguished chapter with many honours to their name, a rich and glorious history, but it is shadowed by a tragedy that struck them relatively recently. The Howling Griffons really are exemplars of what it is to be a Space Marine in the 41st millennium, displaying the courage, the honour and the determination to fight for the Emperor with every ounce of strength they have. As a chapter, we'll be looking at them whilst we do this. The Howling Griffons are a later founding Space Marine chapter, so they're not from the second founding and therefore are unlikely to have had any veterans of the heresy in their ranks. They were founded instead at some point in the 33rd millennium, but it's unclear precisely when this was. So it was after the War of the Beast, but before such events as the Age of Apostasy, the Black Crusades, and the War of Armageddon. However, because it was after the War for the Beast, it is entirely possible they would have had some veterans of this conflict in their ranks. Their homeworld is called Mancora, which they have held since their founding. A feudal world with warring kingdoms constantly in conflict has fostered a very strong warrior and militarized culture on the planet, which makes them perfect as aspirants for the chapter and are readily available to adopt the lifestyle of a space marine. It has also actually been speculated that the Howling Griffons chapter itself has had several involvings in keeping the warring city-states and nations of Mancora on a near-permanent war footing for most of its history. Leaving aside the ethics behind that, it has been very effective at giving them the kinds of recruits they need to keep their chapter strength up. However, they have also earned the right to recruit from additional worlds such as Dinar 4, partly due to the high attrition rates of their own chapter constantly being on the war footing, but also due to the many honours and accolades they've won over the millennium. The High Lords of Terror have allowed them to recruit from several worlds, giving them a much greater pool of resources to draw from. If we compare that to other chapters such as the Salamanders or Space Wolves, who only recruit from one world, this means that they're able to draw a much broader range of aspirants from different planets, giving them links to more worlds around Mancora and the galaxy as a whole, which is very good for them as a chapter, but also means that they themselves have many more protectorate. Now, in terms of who they are, the Howling Griffons are a second founding from the Ultramarines chapter, and are therefore well versed in the Codex Astartes. However, they see it as an excellent way of waging war and a good thesis on fighting, rather than a prescribed doctrine that they must stick doggedly to. As such, they do adhere to its teachings, except for where Guilliman himself encourages innovations in the ways of thinking and making war, which is different to many other chapters out there who see very much the Codex Astartes as being the start and end of all ways of waging war and fighting. So, conversely, the Howling Griffons make use of what's known as the Night World pattern of armour, where stealthing is required, where they paint their armour black and only their shoulder trims keep the chapter colours, something I wish I'd known before I started painting this battle company. But that's just me not doing my research properly. Never mind. Moving on. Another thing to mention about the homeworld Mancora is that the planet itself has levied many aspirants with psychic abilities. Now, as a result, the chapter has a very high number of librarians, and that is a reason they're keen to keep recruiting from it. But naturally, the librarians themselves keep a very close eye on the population to make sure that warp contamination doesn't start to manifest itself in the population. This is one of the benefits of being the homeworld of a Space Marine chapter. You might secretly be having your entire civilization sabotaged so it's permanently at war with your neighbours, but at least there's no demons invading, and some of you get to be Space Marines. You know, I'd say that's a pretty fair trade-off. But like many other Space Marine chapters, oaths have a special significance to the Howling Griffons as well, and this is a fairly fascinating point for them as a chapter. They have something which is very similar to the Oaths of Moment which we saw during the Horus Heresy. Many members of the chapter take oaths both before and during missions, and if the opportunity to fulfill said oath comes up whilst they are on that mission, they must seek their commander's permission, and if they can do so, they will fulfill it. However, it is important to note that they don't go out of their way to do this, especially if it could possibly damage the chapter's position in a particular campaign, or if it could be detrimental to the war effort as a whole. So it is interesting to see that whilst they take their oaths seriously, they are pragmatic enough and dedicated enough to their cause to know when to attack in advance and when not to pursue their own personal missions during the campaign. This is something which I think does go quite a long way to show the discipline that they do have as a chapter, and the recognition that their own oaths and missions should still matter to each battle brother, irrespective of his rank. Now, if we talk briefly about the Howling Griffons honour roll, which has come up a couple times so far in this video, it's worth mentioning that the Howling Griffons have been practically everywhere. Since their initial founding, they have almost constantly been on the war footing. This is partly the reason why they have to recruit from so many worlds and have such a high turnover, is because they have almost never been off campaign in their entire history. Compare that to other, even older chapters, such as the Crimson Fists, the Templars, and even the first founding chapters, who all do have periods of downtime and peace. The Howling Griffons have not made that exception for themselves. They have waged war constantly throughout their entire history, and many of their campaign and honours reflect this. If we just take a very short look at the campaigns that they have been involved with, it goes all the way back to the early years of the Black Crusades. They took part in the Badab War, notably against Lufgut Huron, who became the notorious Huron Blackheart later on. They've fought many campaigns protecting their own planets, including Denar 4, which is one of their recruiting worlds, and even in the most recent conflicts, such as the 13th Black Crusade, the Indomitus Crusade, the War of the Beasts against Ghazghkull Thraka, and the Plague Wars on Ultramar, they have all been very heavily involved. The other interesting thing to know about the Howling Griffons is that when it comes to fighting in campaigns, they don't do half measures. In most of these campaigns that I've just mentioned, the Indomitus Crusade, the War of the Beasts, and the Black Crusade, they don't just commit a handful of squads or a half a company, they commit multiple companies to each of these war footings. The Black Crusade saw 80% of the chapter fighting against Abaddon the Despoiler and his Black Legion and the allies that he brought with him out of the Eye of Terror. The Indomitus Crusade, it's likely they committed substantial amounts of the chapter strength because this was their Primarch's crusade, so naturally they would have a high stake in that. The War of the Beasts saw them commit 3 companies, and the Plague War saw them commit 6 companies. This does go a long way to show just how dedicated the Howling Griffons are to their missions. If they take on a campaign, they are determined to win, and they will commit sufficient resources to that campaign in order to see it through. They are very resourceful as well, considering that their chapter monastery and their home planet are able to produce large amounts of materials that are required to keep them on this constant war footing, which is probably why they are able to commit such large forces and so many men and materials to each of their campaigns. So as we can see, the Howling Griffons do have an extensive and very deep honour roll, history and resource pool to go into. Their honour roll is long and their history is rich. The Howling Griffons really are one of the most exceptional chapters, in my opinion, in the Space Marines. However, that has come at a cost, and that cost has manifested itself as tragedy in their history as well. For the Howling Griffons, one particular tragedy stands out for them above all others. During M38, the 38th millennium, the Howling Griffons were involved in an incident called the Arios Point Massacre. Now, this wasn't a travesty that saw an entire planet's population wiped out or an entire fleet completely destroyed in orbit. No, this was something much smaller, but much more personal to the Howling Griffons. The Arios Point Massacre took place in 220 M38. The chapter master of the time, Orlando Furioso, was travelling with the reserve 8th Company and many of the veterans of the 1st Company. They were heading back to Mancora, the chapter's homeworld, to celebrate the 5,000th anniversary of the chapter's founding. Whilst making a resupply stop at Arios Point, they were ambushed by the Chaos Lord Perclitor the Forsworn. He led a coalition force of the Night Lords and Word-Bearers, Space Marines, in an ambush against the Howling Griffons. Many of them were killed aboard the ship, and a few managed to make their way to the surface of the planet in a last stand. Unfortunately, there was not sufficient time to defend themselves, and the planet's resources were unable to provide them what they needed. The few survivors were massacred on the planet's surface, their equipment stolen, and their gene seed either destroyed or likewise stolen. The chapter master himself was attached to the front of his Thunderhawk and was left orbiting the planet as a reminder to the Howling Griffons and to the Imperium at large of the cruelty that can be inflicted by the Chaos Space Marines. It wasn't until several months later that members of the Howling Griffons discovered the fate of their chapter master. They quickly recovered his body, and every surviving member of the chapter took an oath against Perclitor and against the Word-Bearers in particular. This has led to the chapter harbouring a deep vendetta against the Word-Bearers Legion and any who associate with them, leading many to take personal oaths to slay in combat any suspected Word-Bearers they find during their missions. This brings me back to what I was saying earlier about them taking oaths seriously. Well, this is an example of a very serious oath in action. As such, many conflicts between the two of them have taken place in the subsequent millennia. Every time they meet on the battlefield, it's almost certainly one force will wipe out the other one. Howling Griffons very nearly had a chance to avenge themselves upon their enemy when the current chapter master Alvaro, during the 13th Black Crusade, was able to find Perclitor, who has now been raised to a demon prince, in the forces of Abaddon the Despoiler. No one questioned his actions, he simply led a force to destroy them. Whether he was successful or not is unclear. So as we can see with the Howling Griffons, they have a very long and very illustrious history, which they have managed to maintain in light of endless challenges and endless struggles that are common to any Space Marine chapter. But to see them maintain themselves in such a manner and such consistency is something which should certainly be noted. There are other chapters that have come and gone, fallen off the radar, or have had to take a step back, but not the Howling Griffons. They have stayed at the forefront of the defences of humanity for many millennia. I'd say that makes them equal to any of the first founding chapters and any other second founding out there. Truly, these are Space Marines who are willing to give everything for the Imperium and are able to keep going in spite of their losses. So this has been a fun little trip into the history of the Howling Griffons. I'd be curious to know if you guys want to see me do more videos like this, where we explore the history of certain things in the 41st millennium, and that could also be an interesting thing to do as well. But as ever, I want you to know your thoughts on this. What do you guys think of the Howling Griffons? Do you believe that they are the stalwart defenders of humanity? Do you believe that they are also zealous fanatics who need to be curtailed? Are there any other chapters that you think maybe deserve to be mentioned higher up the chain than the Howling Griffons? Or are there any particular things about the Howling Griffons that you like? Let me know. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
So there we have it, a video all about the Howling Griffons chapter. I thought that was all very inspirational personally, and we finally got to see one of them finished. This one, in fact, our lieutenant, yeah, I'm quite happy with how he turned out. You may have noticed I've left his shoulder pad blank. That's because I can't find any transfers for him at this time. But if this video gets 100 likes, just 100 likes, then I will freehand paint his shoulder pad. Okay, 100 likes on this video, I will freehand paint it, and who knows, I might even do a video doing it. So in any case, thank you all very, very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and until next time, goodbye, and have a lovely day.